you.
Thank you.
And it's wonderful to welcome you all to the fourth publishing workshop this year. How can we publish our books and what is required to publish our books? And as I mentioned earlier, what I'm going to do today is do, first of all, a very quick overview of all the topics that we have touched upon in this year, in these quarterly workshops. So we'll do a little resume of all these topics, particularly for people who were not able to attend earlier workshops. So we're going to go through the genesis of writing a book. And then after the break, we are going to talk specifically about promoting your book. As I have found, I have, right now I'm working on my 27th book. I published 26 books. I'm working on my 27th book, and I've discovered that publishing is really about promoting. Once you have written your book and it's published, that's only half the story. Then you have to go and do a great job in promoting and marketing your book. The good news is that you can do that now with many things that don't cost anything. It just is your effort, your commitment, your dedication to make sure that your book becomes a success and is actually out there and people know about it, people talk about it. So let's get started with my presentation, publishing your book. And we're going to talk specifically in the second half about promotion and marketing. But the first question that we have to ask ourselves, many of you are thinking about publishing your research, publishing your dissertation. Why would you do that? Why should you do that? Well, I always believe that once people have published their dissertation, it can serve as a wonderful launch platform for your career as an expert in your field. I mean, a book gives you a sense of authenticity, a sense of credibility that you simply don't have simply by having your dissertation filed in ProQuest, where a few people and a dog may sometimes go and look for it. Having your dissertation as a real book that you can take to conferences, that you can take to symposia, that you can sign, physically sign whenever you get together with potential readers, is a wonderful thing to do, is a wonderful thing to have. And you are in a very fortunate position. When I did my dissertation in a distant past in a galaxy far, far away in 1979, I didn't have these opportunities, you know. Your dissertation was put on a microfiche, which is a format that's no longer known. It gathers dust in public libraries. And on microfiche, it was distributed throughout the United States. And amazingly enough, I still have books that refer to that dissertation. I don't know exactly how they were able to dig it up, but you, by contrast, have the ability to publish your dissertation in so many ways that I didn't have in the 1970s. So that is definitely a wonderful thing to have. The question that you have to ask yourself is your work publishable? What unique insights has your study produced? You know, when I'm retired now, I'm Professor Emeritus, which means I still have a toe in the fielding waters, so to speak. But when I was still core faculty, first in psychology and then in HOD, I often asked, and I warned my students I would do that. During the FOR, I would ask the question, tell me in 1 or 2 paragraphs, what has your study produced? What is the takeaway? What is the essential contribution to the academy? And 9 out of 10 people went, well, you know, well, I surveyed 30 people. And I said, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if you were in an elevator with the publisher of Simon & Schuster, and you have 30 seconds to say, this is what I have found. And most students couldn't do it, even though I warned them I would ask that question, because you are so deeply embedded in all the morass of data and the literature and the analysis and the graphs and the percentages and the data analysis that you sometimes don't see the forest through the trees. And so to write a book, it's important to determine for yourself what is the essential takeaway for the reader. And the second question then is, and who is interested in those findings? What is the reader going to get out of that? What is the reader going to get out of reading your book? And that is the very first step in publishing your book, to know this is the end goal. You know, I just watched the World Cup, which was a very conflicted experience for me as a Dutch American. It's like the Dutch were playing the Americans. The two brothers were fighting each other in my psyche. That's essentially what you have to do. You have to have an end goal. What is my book going to tell the reader? Once you have that, you have the kernel of what it is that your book is going to talk about. The thing we have to understand is that the dissertation is unpublishable. A dissertation, as it exists right now, is unpublishable. It's a kludge. It has everything unraveled. Everything is unraveled. The literature review is separate. The methodology is separate. The research results, the discussion of the results, these are all separate silos. And the reason is that as faculty, we need to determine whether you can do all of those things. That's why we have you do it separately. But in a book, you cannot do that. In a book, all of these elements have to be integrated into a seamless narrative. That's what we're talking about. So please, don't write a book that starts with introduction of the problem, chapter 2, literature review, chapter 3, methodology, because nobody will read it. That's not how we read. We want to see a narrative arc, a flowing, seamless story, a story about the topics that you want to write about. And every chapter of that book has to have some of the literature, has to have some of the data that you have found, has to have some of the analysis of the results that you have uncovered. Every chapter. So all of that structure that you've created must be recast into a seamless narrative from the beginning to the end. And that's why I call that recasting, reimagining your dissertation research into a compelling linear narrative. You have to really rewrite, and don't copy and paste. Please don't copy and paste from your dissertation into this new book that we're writing about. You know what you have found, you know your data, you know your literature. Now use those elements to create a seamless presentation that throughout the book harks back to the literature, harks back to the data. Do you see what I'm saying? That is how you write a book. When I write a book, right now I'm writing a book about, it's called The Fractured Kingdom. And what I'm trying to do is bring the Christian right and the Christian left together by saying, let's stop worrying about what people do in their bedrooms. Let's focus on what Jesus was actually talking about during his ministry. What a concept, isn't it? If you say you're a Christian, which means you follow Jesus, why don't we actually look at what he had to say? And throughout my writing, I refer to literature, I refer to data that I have found, I refer to historical sources all the way through. And that's how you should develop your book as well. And the thing that you must try to do is translate the insights from your research, which is very theoretical in many ways, very theoretical, into real world ideas of value. What is it today that your reader gets from reading your book? How does your research into leadership, for example, translate into practical takeaways for leaders of today, leaders of organizations today. And that brings me to the art of writing. Writing is storytelling. You're telling a story. Very often when I read dissertations, I don't get that at all. Very often what we get is a book report, and he wrote this and she wrote that, and then he had a theory, la la la, and then she did research, la la la, and say, what am I doing? What am I supposed to do with all that? Where is the story that binds all of these data points together? A dissertation is not a bundle of research. It's not a book report. A dissertation is your ability to distill from what all of these sources are saying, and to arrange it critically in a story that says, well, this has value, this is not. This is a valid point, this is not. You are working as a scholar in critically examining the literature, and you're taking those nuggets and use them as bases, as the foundation for the story that you want to tell. So it's about a logical narrative. Many times when I read a dissertation, I find there is no logical connection between chapter 2 and chapter 3, or chapter 3 and chapter 4. It's like these are individual silos and they're completely written in isolation. Well, we can't have that. Our story needs to propel us throughout the book. And so transitions between chapters are extremely important. As we saw in the preceding chapter, la da da di da di da. And now we're going to look at the same idea from this perspective. Every chapter that you bring to the table must continue the thread, the logical thread that you initiated in the beginning. It's like you're weaving a tapestry in a way. And every chapter is just one more color, one more pattern in this beautiful tapestry that we're making. So making sure that as you write your book, chapters connect logically to one another. As you know, I'm the managing editor of Fielding University Press. And very often we have books that are contributed by as many as 20 different authors. And what I typically ask the editors to do is, once they start, is have first every contributing author write a synopsis of what she or he is going to say in the chapter that they're writing. And then those synopses are shared with everyone working on the book, so that you can actually say, writing your chapter, as Susan wrote in chapter 2, or as John will explain to you in chapter 17. You see what I'm saying? There must be this connective tissue between the individual chapters. Only then do you keep your reader spellbound. Only then do you keep your reader eager to learn more, because the reader can recognize the common thread, the rail track that runs through these chapters. And only then is the reader eager to find out more what it is you're going to say on that topic. And so writing is really having a conversation with your reader. And I always say my mantra is scholarly writing is talking about very complex issues in very simple language. That's my mantra. And I try to do that in my own writing. I try to have a very conversational style, and I ask rhetorical questions, and then I answer them. And sometimes I use very simple language, like, well, that's a real problem, because, things like that. You have to have a conversation. Don't try to impress your reader by creating long sentences with lots of subclauses and filled with jargon. That's not scholarly writing. You're going to turn your reader off by doing that. So have a conversation with the reader. What the art of writing is not, is trying to impress the reader with all the literature you've read. We don't care, really. What we really care about is what it is that the literature has told you. That's what we want to hear. But volume, quantity is not quality. I've seen dissertations that go on for pages after pages, endless summary of the various books they've written. What am I supposed to do? Give you a medal? No, that's not what it's about. It's about you read the literature. What is the takeaway from that literature? Tell us the good and the bad. Tell us what is useful for the argument that we're doing or not. That's what we want to hear. So be careful with that. You know, sometimes I get submissions to Fielding University Press with a monograph with chapters by students who have completed their dissertation, and their bibliography is the exact bibliography from the dissertation. It goes on for 10 pages. I send it back. I reject that, because we only want to see bibliography that has a direct relevance to the story that you have told. Don't try to impress me with a huge bibliography. I couldn't care less, quite frankly. What I want to see is references that have a direct relationship to the things that you're talking about. So be careful with that. It's not giving a full inventory of all your qualitative data. That's not what it's about. It's about telling us what it is that you're trying to communicate based on your research. The writing is taking your readers on a journey. You are the guide. You are the guide. You're going to go on a journey with your people, with your readers, and you're going to go and hopefully uncover some untrodden lands, as Shakespeare would have said. And you're going to do that because we're going to try to get a better understanding of the human condition. So keep that idea in your mind. You're taking the reader on a journey, and it's an exciting journey. It's an adventure, and you're the guide. You're taking them. And so it's all about clear and persuasion, about convincing the reader through argumentation. You know, when I was still core faculty at Fielding, I gave a course on argumentation in the hope that that would become part of the required curriculum. I still hope that somewhere down the line will be done. You cannot be a scholar, you cannot be an EDD or a PhD without understanding the art of argumentation. You know, I was educated in Europe, and I tell you, in our graduate program, argumentation was front and center. We had argumentation clubs. We debated each other because without the knowledge of how you construct a persuasive argument, how are you ever going to write a dissertation? And that's one of the things I still believe that Fielding must do. I mean, writing is important, but writing is the product of argumentation. You cannot write unless you know how to argue. And so that's hopefully still something that will be added to the core curriculum there. The art of argumentation is presenting an idea based on tangible and pertinent evidence. That's it. It's evidence-based writing. That's argumentation. And you make your case. Imagine yourself, you're a prosecutor in front of a courtroom, and you're making your case about the guilt or the innocence of the defendant. And what do? Well, you make your case through Exhibit A and Exhibit B and Exhibit C. Well, that's what you're going to do. And when you write an argument, you're offering a critical analysis by taking your evidence, in this case, the literature, but you're presenting the literature by emphasizing the differences between the various points of view in the literature. We call that secondary data. And then the other evidence that you're using is what we call primary data, which is, on the one hand, your research, which is very often based on oral testimony, on interviews, but also just-in-time data. Just-in-time data. I'm a huge proponent of that. The reason is that your literature is usually a few years out of date. That's just the way it is. It takes at least a year or two for a journal article to be published, and the world moves on in the meantime. And secondly, your interviews are self-reports, and as psychology tells us, self-reports are biased. There's really no way around that. You know, when you ask someone to talk about his or her experience, that is a self-report with built-in biases. So the way to do that is to use just-in-time media, which could be newspaper prints, the New York Times. It could be broadcast, PBS, 60 Minutes. It could be digital publications, blogs. It could be a magazine called The Economist, which I'm a big proponent of, The Economist, which has tons of studies every week on a scholarly level, but just in time. This is what's happening in society right now. And it's, again, so important to offset, to balance the bias of your self-reports and the fact that your literature is so often out of date. And just as you prepare a book on your dissertation, it's a wonderful opportunity to go back and update your dissertation using some of these just-in-time media. Just go to the New York Times, become a subscriber. You have access to their entire database. Just do a search in the New York Times on any topic. Leadership in China, I don't care, something like that. You'll get a whole list of wonderful articles based on reporting of things that are happening now, that are happening in society right now. So the art of argumentation is about primary and secondary evidence that should illustrate your story from the very beginning, that should illustrate that argument from the very beginning. You know, here's a first page. I'm not sure if you can see it, from my book, Mapping America, which I wrote based on a collection of maps that are owned by Neil Asbury, who has the largest private collection of maps of the United States. And what I wanted to do is tell the story of the birth of America, how America came in being from the very beginning, from Christopher Columbus all the way on through the exploration, the French and Indian War, and finally the American Revolution. But I wanted to tell that story through the prism of maps because most of scholars who write about that period say, well, you know, there's really no video about the American Revolutionary War. Photography didn't exist, television didn't exist, film didn't exist. So we really have no way to visualize that. And I wanted to correct that because we do have a very important mass medium that tells the story of the United States. And there's maps, and maps have been typically completely ignored in the scholarly literature. But what I do, I mean, I could have very easily started the book with a whole story about, you know, the history of cartography. Who cares, right? Who cares? And so I start in sort of a novelistic fashion, how Walter Raleigh, who was one of the first explorers of the American coast, how he was put to death because he got a little bit too enthusiastic. And so I open with a novel-like opening of how he spent his last days in his last hours in his cell before he was executed. It's a wonderful story because he was actually in great spirits. He had a heavy fever, a very strong fever. And he said, well, yeah, I'm not too worried about it because at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, the doctor is going to come and he's going to heal me of it, you know, by cutting off his head. And so that's how you open a book, folks. You open a book not by writing, by overloading the reader with, well, we're going to talk about, you know, but you open it up in a way that you welcome guests to your party. You know, you welcome them in and look, so nice that you could join us. And here's a wonderful story, an anecdote to start off with. You can, for example, you can start with how you were attracted yourself to the topic that you're writing about. How did you come into contact with the subject that you're writing about? Well, one day I was, you see what I'm saying? So you open it up in a very, very open, very personal way before you get into the nitty-gritty of your argumentation. I found that I've always done that with all my books, and I find that really, really works very well. Learning to write well means reading As you know, I came to the United States in the 1970s. English was not my first language. And I learned to not only speak English, but also, of course, I had English, lessons in school, but I learned to write in the English language, which was not my first language, by reading. I read voraciously, and you should too. Before I start a new book, I always read some of my favorite authors to just get me in the groove. As a writer, we talk about the groove. You have to be in the groove of writing, when inspiration wells up inside of you and you feel an urge to run to a keyboard and start pounding away some sentences. And you do that by reading. So I would recommend that you read, preferably nonfiction, but nothing necessarily related to your subject. I learned to write well, at least I hope I write well, because I read a lot. I typically read 3 or 4 books simultaneously. I also always running to the library because my wife finally said, we cannot have any more books in our house. And so, of course, I still buy a few books. I sneak a few in, but the library is my main source of reading right now. And so here are a few books that I recommend. Michael Dobbs, King Richard, Nixon, and Watergate. Now, we all know the story of Watergate. We all know basically the key aspects, but my God, this book was a thriller. It was like a Netflix thriller. I tell you, I just could not stop reading it. So this is a book that I strongly recommend. Michael Dobbs, King Richard, absolutely fascinating book of nonfiction. I'm a World War II buff. You don't have to be a World War II buff to enjoy Ian Toll's Twilight of the Gods. Brilliant book. It's actually the 3rd in a trilogy. You don't have to read the whole trilogy, but Twilight of the Gods talks about the ultimate defeat of the Japanese Navy in 1944 and 1945, culminating, of course, in the attack on the mainland through an aerial assault and the 2 terrible atom bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is a fascinating read, and here again, it's a thick book, but I think I would recommend it for the Christmas holidays when hopefully you'll have some time. You can't put it down. The man, I mean, when he talks about F-4F Thunderbolts, I think they were called, these fighter planes being catapulted of a carrier, of a World War II era carrier. And the way he describes it, you smell the oil and the kerosene, and you feel the wind in your hair, and you see the guy with the flag going, go, and you hear the engine revving up, and you see this fighter plane hobbling down the teak floor of the carrier and sort of wobble into the air. It's magnificent. It's magnificent writing. It's highly recommended. If you're into, this is not a book you want to read when you're on a cruise, but if you are, so if you happen to go on a cruise, don't take this book. But The Last Crossing of the Lusitania, Eric Larson, wonderful historian, author, strongly recommended. And with all due modesty, I have added one of my books. You don't have to buy it, but it is. It's one of my finest books, if I may say so, The Ultimate Visual History of the World. I had to write it. The National Geographic asked me, can you write a story? Can you write a book about the history of the world? I said, okay, fine. Yeah, but what? You want me to do what? And I did it. It took me 3 years to write a story. And it's really a story of human accomplishment. I wasn't all that interested in wars and battles and kings and queens. I wanted to write a book about human accomplishments from the very beginning, from prehistory, not just in Europe or not just in Egypt, But in the Americas, what do we know about prehistory in the Americas? Very little. And so that's the book that is there, and you can get it on, all these books are available on Amazon or your local bookstore, whatever the case may be. Okay, a lot of you have told me in emails that you want to have a traditional publisher, or you want to pitch your book to Feeling University Press. To do that, you have to write a book proposal. And in your book proposal, you have to talk about a few things. This is standard for the industry. This is not just for Feeling University Press. This is for any publisher that you want to pitch about your book. And that is, what is your book about? It's an obvious thing, of course, but that's the beginning. What is your book about? What unique insights does it offer? That's the important thing to address. And why is it different from other books on the subject? We call that comps. Just like in the real estate business, we call it comps. And so in your proposal, you have to be very frank and forthright and said, now there are, of course, some books on the subject of leadership, or there are some books on the subject of social change, or whatever it is that you're writing about. But then you go and you briefly explain in one paragraph what these other books are about and why they do not address what you're going to write about. You see what I'm saying? That gives the publisher a sense that, first of all, you know what you're talking about. You are in command of the literature around your subject. And three, you write with authority because you have seen what other people have said. And you're saying, well, that's interesting, but what I am contributing is not something that has been discussed before. Do you see my point? So comps are very, very important, whether you pitch to Feeling University Press or any other traditional publisher. Please do that research. Spend an afternoon, reading some of the, of course, your literature, but we're talking specifically about books that have been written about your subject in the last, say, 3 to 5 years, and look into that. Talk about your audience. Who is your audience? Who's going to read your book? It's a fair question. Who is going to read your book? And don't say, well, anyone between 18 and 85, or, what type of person is going to be interested in your book? And if we know that, what are they getting out of that? I always come back to this takeaway. It's so important, the takeaway, because many students, are so fixated on the dissertation and on the data and on the research that they lose sight of the fact that there must be an outcome of that book. If I make the effort of not only buying the book, but reading the book, what is it then I'm going to be left with? And that is so important that you identify that for your publisher. And then tell about what qualifies you to write this book. Well, of course, you're a doctoral student, you have a doctorate, or if you did a master's program, you have a master's degree, and that is eminently qualifying. But maybe you've done some other things as well. You've done research in a community. Maybe your professional qualifications are helpful in this regard. So make sure that you clearly state, I am writing this book because I know what I'm talking about. I know what it is that I'm talking about. And then talk about how credible your findings are, the integrity of your research. What is it that you've done to arrive at these conclusions? And why are they credible and authoritative? And once again, you're talking about primary data, your own research, just-in-time data, the publications that you've read around your topic in just the last couple of months, and of course, secondary data, the literature. And finally, have you published on this topic before? If you haven't, that's perfectly fine. But if you have published on this topic before, we would like to know about it. We'd like to know what it is that you've done. So here is a brief outline. And again, as Hillary said, the recording of this talk will be posted on the Alumni Association website, so you can review this once more. But this is an overview of what a book proposal looks like. The overview, the market analysis, comparative works, promotion. We're going to talk about that in the second half of this talk. How do you promote your books? An author bio, what makes you qualified, what makes you an expert in this field. And then an outline. We're going to talk about that for a little bit. An outline, which is a brief list of chapters, the table of contents, with a brief description of what every chapter is about. Now, if you have a sample chapter, that is a huge plus. If you don't, it's okay. But somewhere down the line, the publisher will ask you, do you have a sample chapter? And the reason is that a sample chapter gives them a chance to look at your writing style. Does she know how to write? Does he articulate his ideas in a compelling way? Is it fun to read this book? Is it enjoyable? The only way to determine that for a publisher is to have a sample chapter. Doesn't have to be chapter 1. It could be chapter 1. Could be something else. When I submitted my book proposal for The Fractured Kingdom, I enclosed chapter 7, for example, that I had already written. So pitching a book to a traditional publisher is something that needs careful work, careful study. Doesn't have to be big, not including your sample chapters. The whole thing could be captured in 4 or 5 pages. So we're not talking all, nobody's going to read a whole thesis, you know. Keep it short, but keep it pertinent. And then have a sample chapter if you can. The sample chapter doesn't have to be complete, but at least 5 or 10 pages of your writing style will be extremely useful for the publisher to find out what it is that you're going to be talking about. Okay, so this is the book proposal summary. All right, you are no longer pitching to your dissertation committee. Remember, you're pitching to a publisher and you're asking him or her to take a leap of faith, to invest in you in a property that is not yet known because you haven't written it yet. So you must be very persuasive. And that's why take care in putting together your book proposal. Of course, this is, again, talking about traditional publishers. In a minute after the break, we're going to talk about non-traditional publishers, independent platforms. Now, of course, they are interested in making sure that what you write makes sense, you know, but they are giving you more control of the process. We'll talk about the process in a little bit. An outline, again, as I said earlier, is a brief overview of your future book, chapters, and a brief description of each chapter. So chapter 7, you write a brief paragraph what that chapter is going to be about. Chapter 8, well, in chapter 8, I'm going to talk about blah, 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 blah. That's an outline. And each of these key insights then form the basis of each chapter. It's a wonderful way. I always do that. When I start writing a book, I begin with an outline so that I know the totality of the book. So I have a compass, literally a compass, that tells me what I have to cover in each chapter. Okay, so start with writing an outline of your book, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and a brief description of what each of these chapters should be about. And that will then be your guidebook as you begin to write. And you know, you get to chapter 3 and you say, wait a minute, I think I should talk about this in chapter 7. Let me look. Oh yeah, in chapter 7, I should be talking about this. So it keeps you on track, so to speak. So an outline is extremely important. It helps you to develop your argument in a fluid way across these chapters, because again, we have a narrative thread that continues like a Bach basso continuo throughout the symphony of your book. And again, evidence, literature, research, and just-in-time data. I keep hammering on that because it is so important to balance the potential bias of your self-reports with just-in-time data. Again, we're talking about boosting your credibility as an author, boosting your credibility as an author. And I found that if I quote the New York Times or the Economist or the Washington Post, that carries as much, if not more, credibility in my books than when I quote some literature source from 1997. This is what publishers are extremely keen about, to make sure that your book has relevance today, not 10, 20 years ago, today. Very, very important. Arguing data, always ask yourself, is my chapter credible? Does it provide compelling evidence? How is this data relevant to the point my chapter wants to make? If the data is not relevant to the point that you're making, don't use it. Very often in dissertations, I come across data references and I say, how does this relate to your argument? Well, I read it and I thought it was a very interesting study. I said, that's not the point. The point is not if the study is interesting. The point is, are you citing this study because it has pertinence to the point you're making? No? Well, then take it out. It's not about impressing people with all the things you read. It's about using evidence judiciously, using evidence wisely. That's what arguing data is about. So always show how the data that you cite, whatever kind of data it is, how it informs your argument. Sometimes you can, and I really encourage always students to do that. Sometimes I encourage them to cite studies that flagrantly disagree with what they're saying. Well, my argument, what I'm saying here, there is this study that disagrees with that. That's courage. Because when you do that, you boost the credibility of you as a scholar. It shows that you know the literature inside and out, to the point that you're not just citing people who agree with you, but you have the courage to cite people who disagree with you. And then, of course, you make a point why these people are wrong. And when you do that, and I do this all the time in my books, where I show multiple perspectives of various scholarly works, and I say, well, it's interesting, but it is not relevant because da 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 da. Now the reader feels like, hey, I'm getting a balanced view. I'm getting a balanced view of the topic that you're writing about. The 10 steps of writing a manuscript: your first draft, and then you circulate that draft among friends, family, partners. Could you read this chapter for me? I mean, it's so important that you do that. Get their feedback. Based on that feedback, you do a final draft. That final draft goes to the publisher, who puts it in copy edit. The copy editor may come back to you and say, this paragraph doesn't make sense to me. Explain to me what it is that you're trying to say, because it doesn't really make sense to me. And you're so close to the text that you often don't see that. And I'm an experienced writer, but I still, all my books are copy edited, believe you me, because many times they come up with things and I say, yeah, you're right. That doesn't make sense. Or I have not made this point very clear. Or this point needs further evidence, needs further illustration. Manuscript lock. Once the publisher comes back and says, okay, your work is copy edited, you can review it one more time. You can have some issues with what the copy editor did, but once that process is done, we have manuscript lock, which means at this point, lots of money is going to be spent. And I, as a managing editor of Fielding University Press, I'm always battling this point, because when I tell my authors, manuscript lock. That means that you cannot make any changes, because right now I'm burning serious money in the process of laying it out. Artists now take over, and they take your Word document or whatever it is, and they make a beautiful layout, wonderful spreads, and the way they design things, and with headers and little ornaments on left and right, and they have pictures that you may have, and illustrations and graphs. That is a very laborious and a very expensive process. So we can't have, at this point, a writer say, you know what, I think I want to rewrite chapter 6. That is definitely not possible. So be aware that after the copy edit, that's it, folks. The ship is off the rails. The train has left the station. And very often I do battle. I just had a situation with a book that we're writing right now, the book of higher education, where an author came back, and we were well into layouts, and said, I don't feel good about my chapter. Can I rewrite it? And the answer is no. That's just the way it is. It's submitted to the printer publisher. You get a proof copy. And again, the proof copy is there just for really errors, spelling errors that may have occurred as part of the layout process. Very rare. Sometimes something could have happened. I had to rewrite my book, Ultimate Visual History of the World. The manuscript was done. It was then copy edit. And then the COVID pandemic erupted. And so I literally had to, and National Geographic was completely in support of that. I had to rewrite my last chapter to cover the COVID pandemic. These things can happen. These can happen. Hopefully not too often. And then we do an ebook. An ebook is very different from a print book, and you will see that later on when we talk about that, because a print book is printed. It's on paper, it's frozen in time, that's it, there it is. An ebook is a dynamic format. An ebook, that's why the engineering of ebooks is very different from the production of a printed book. Because first of all, we have to allow flowable text, which means that when you read an ebook on your Kindle or your iPad, you have to be able to manipulate the size, the font, make it larger, make it smaller, do all kinds of things, blow up pictures. And to do that is a whole different process. And of course, when you have DOIs or URLs, they have to be active, because guess what? In an ebook, you can click on a DOI and boom, you go to the actual article. It's a living document, an ebook, a very different animal from a printed book. So that's a separate process. And finally, now you're a published author, and the production begins, the promotion begins. Book titles. I can tell you how often I get authors who come up with a title like The Constant Wave, Ebb and Flow of the Sea, a critical analysis of leadership theories in the United States, something like that. Right. And the reason is that that's how journal articles are titled. A journal article typically has a somewhat ambiguous main clause, and it's only in the subclause where you actually find out what the book is about. And I've struggled with almost every author that submits books to Fielding University Press, because they are so ingrained in that format of journal article titles, la 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 la, semicolon, la 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 la. And I say, wait a minute, that works for a journal article. It does not work for a book, folks. In a book title, you have to say bammo, whammo, 3 or 4 words. That's it. Because that title has to be big, bold on the cover so it can grab the reader as she or he browses through Amazon, walks past a bookstore in airports, I guess, because where do we have bookstores anymore? Here in Santa Monica, we don't have a single bookstore anymore. Can you believe that? Santa Monica, the intellectual capital of California. Well, I wouldn't even go that far. But certainly, it's such a heartbreak to me that here in Santa Monica, we don't have a single bookstore anymore. They're all done. The only time I can see a live bookstore is when I travel or I go to an airport. In the airport, they still have bookstores. Anyways, the title has to grab you. So make sure that the book title is concise and smash, bang, right in your face. You know, we had a title, a book that we're writing right now about social innovation, and it had a beautiful, lovely, long title. And we changed it to Driving Social Innovation. Bang. Driving Social Innovation. 3 words. Boom. Tells the whole thing. So make sure you do that. Think about your title. Now, the title, in many cases, when you publish a book with a traditional publisher, such as a university press, the publisher is in charge of choosing the title. That's something you have to live with. But you can help that process by suggesting a title that really says exactly what the book is about. Never insert spaces between paragraphs. I can tell you how many problems we have with that. We get manuscripts where people have this word setting, and I hate it, where there's a paragraph between each, or there's a space between each paragraph. Turn off all auto formatting. Bulleted points, for example, another thing. Bulleted items, you know, when you do a bullet, Word says, oh, stop, I'll make that for you. Can't have that, because all of those auto formatting functions in Word carry artifacts which show up in the layout process as all kinds of weird scribblies. Can tell you the problems we've had with that. Create an indent throughout your manuscript using the little ruler on the top of your Word document. The Word document has a ruler, and there you set your indents globally for the entire manuscript. Don't use the tab key to make your indents, because then you have all kinds of new artifacts. A tab key creates an artifact in your manuscript. Even though you don't see it, it is there. So set a global indent at the top of your manuscript when you begin to write. Never copy and paste from another source, whether it's PDF, HTML, because all of these creations, formats, carry metadata that seriously disrupts the flow of your document. And I can tell you how many, at one point we had to scrap an entire layout and start all over again, because somebody had copied from an HTML website or copied from a PDF, and being lazy, let's face it, being lazy rather than retyping it, just copy and pasting it. You cannot do that. You really cannot do that, because it creates a lot of problems. Traditional publishing requires you to submit a book proposal with at least 1 chapters. Agents receive hundreds of submissions per week or even per day. And that's why direct submissions to publishers rarely result in acceptance unless your subject is highly topical. So if you want to pursue a traditional publisher, you have to typically use an agent, unless it's a small publisher who accepts direct submissions. But be aware, you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of other people competing for that same spot. And you may or may not get a modest advance. Chances are you don't. And typically your royalties are 5%, 10% of the outset. At Fielding University Press, we publish about 5 or 6 books per year. Thanks to Pauline's Fielding Endowment for Lifelong Learning, we now have the funding to also publish around 3 books per year from alumni authors. We never did that. We previously only published the work of faculty, as well as faculty at other universities. We allow students to publish a chapter about their dissertation, but it was always had to be edited or supervised by a faculty member. Now we can actually do complete books written by an alumna or an alumnus, thanks to the Endowment for Lifelong Learning that Pauline has established. So we're very grateful for Pauline for having done that. Alumni books, if you present them to Fielding, must have a preface written by a prominent expert in your field. Who is that? Well, it's your external examiner. Ask your external examiner to write a little preface. I mean, if you have a fairly good relationship with an examiner, which I assume you do, because that examiner reviewed your dissertation, I'm sure many of them don't, have no problem. 1 page, it doesn't have to be very long, just a kind little preface. It's very important because then on the cover, you can say, with a preface by blah, 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 which is an implied peer review. It's an implied peer review. So it really helps that. You can even ask your chair to write a little introduction, maybe, just a few pages. Again, these things boost your credibility in the field. And then, of course, we expect our alumni authors to actively promote their book, which is what we're going to talk about in the second hour. And if accepted, Fielding and the author, and we're the only ones who do that, by the way, once we recoup the cost of publishing your book, we share royalties with you 50-50. Not many publishers will do that, but we believe in open access publishing, which is a set of rules for fair publishing, fair practices in publishing. And so once we recoup, we share our royalties 50-50 with you as the author. And we now have several books that are profitable, and those authors, they get a check every year after we do our annual sales review. So it's a wonderful way in which we can share the proceeds. Here, for example, is the first book that was published by an alumna this year, thanks to the Lifelong Learning Endowment, the Sexual Misconduct Prevention Guidebook, written by Laura McGuire, and she is the first beneficiary. So you can see we worked very quickly after Pauline established the endowment late last year. Here we have already the first book published by an alumna, Laura McGuire. It's a wonderful book. It's a great book based on her dissertation. Okay, we talk about formatting. I'm going to quickly go through that because I think we have covered this previously, and you will be able to review this. We very much welcome illustrations, provided you clear the copyright. And if you have questions about that, we can deal with that in the Q&A, except for word tables. Word tables are not scalable. And your book will be published in a format of 6x9, which is the standard US trade book format, 6 inches by 9 inches. Your word tables are typically created on your computer in a page size 8x11, but an 8x11 word table cannot be scaled down to 6x9. So that's why we say we do not accept word formatted tables. If you have them, one way you could do that is make them as big as you can on your computer, and then take a screenshot, which will produce a PNG image. And if it's not too corrupted, usually it gets a little low resolution. But if you can make a screenshot that is fairly crisp, then we can use it because PNG graphics are scalable, as are JPEGs. Okay, we're going to stop here for a moment because I want to make sure that we have enough time for the promotion and the marketing aspect of what we're going to talk about. This was basically an overview of everything that we've covered in the past 3 workshops. So let's take a 5-minute break. It is now, let's see, it's my watch, it's about 10:36. Take a 5-minute stretch break, go get some coffee or tea, and we will continue with promotion and marketing your book in about 5 minutes, and then after that we'll have an open Q&A, and please hit me with any questions related to your individual book. All right? Okay, good. Off you go. We'll be back in 5 minutes. And I'll pause the recording. I'm going to resume recording, and I'm going back to my PowerPoint, because one thing that I want to recapitulate before we go on is the issue of, if I can get to my screen here, there we go, of independent publishing. Okay, here we go. Let's first talk about ebooks. Your ebook can now be published through a whole range of things. And here I have put together the leading ebook publishers in the United States. Amazon KDP. We have a distribution agreement with Amazon KDP at Fielding University Press. It's not for the faint of heart. You really need to be able to be fairly technical to deal with that. Smashwords, absolutely not. You can send them your Word document and they say, thank you, and they publish it. You don't have to do anything. Obviously, if you do that, I would still recommend you do your own copy editing. If you want to do copy editing, we have a group of people that we use for copy editing. They offer us academic rates, which are substantially below commercial rates. So if you're looking for a copy editor for your book, please let me know. I will put you in touch with a copy editor. Average rates are a penny a word, 1 cent a word. So if your book is 20,000 words, they will charge $200. And I tell you, that is way, way below the standard rates that are in the commercial industry. So do have your manuscript copy edited, but then you can send it to Smashwords, Barnes & Noble Press, Rakuten Kobo. And the nice thing about ebooks is that there is no cost of printing involved. So you get as much as 70% of royalties, assuming that your ebook is priced between $2.99 and $9.99, $9.99 being the high end, the top, the cap of your ebook pricing. So you can get as much as 70% of royalties, which is a big, big plus of publishing on an ebook. That's not the case with printed books, because there the publisher has the whole cost of printing the book and shipping it and all these other things. Smashword, here is a picture of Smashwords. Very easy to use. It's no frills, as you can see. It's no frills, but you can ask them to put your book on the cover page, as they have here. This also acts as their sales page. All you have to do is send in your Word document and a cover image if you have it, or they will make a cover for you. And it doesn't cost anything. You just upload it and you're a published author. And look, they have distribution to all of the main ebook distributors in the United States. Apple Books. I'm a big Apple iBook user. I don't use Kindle. I think the iPad is a better platform, but that's just me. Amazon has a far bigger market share. So why distribution? Cloud Library, International, Baker and Taylor, Livraria Cultura. So they have an international distribution. And again, it doesn't cost a dime. It doesn't cost a dime to get your book on ebooks. There is such a thing as print-on-demand publishing. In the past, publishing a book, and in many cases for traditional publishers, this is still true, that if you publish a book, they do a run on offset printing, and a minimum run is 3,000 copies. So the publisher must make an investment of $3,000 right off the top to get your book in the bookstore or in Amazon. And that's a big cost. And then came print on demand. And print on demand is a big machine. I've seen it. It's a machine that fills a classroom. And on one end is your manuscript, and it goes digitally through all kinds of pressing and printing. And at the end, rolls out your book, one-off. It's a one-off. And POD, print on demand, is incredibly efficient because it also means for the environment that we're not going to pollute the environment with lots of unsold books, right, that have to be pulped and destroyed. So print on demand means if I place an order, for example, at Amazon for your book, Amazon tells the machine operators, hey, Diane's book has been sold today, and they push a button. Diane's book is processed, her book comes out, in the envelope it goes straight to the end user, the reader. No bookstore, no shipping, no inventory, no pick and pack. All that whole process of traditional publishing is eliminated, which is why Amazon is making so much money and why you potentially can make so much money. Do you understand how that works? So print on demand is now, and in the beginning, the quality was sort of iffy. I tell you what, I was commissioned to write a book, which was for print on demand, full color, all artwork, beautiful paintings. And I received it. And I can tell you, I cannot distinguish it from a traditional offset printed book. Beautifully done, hardcover book, thick, heavy, glossy pages, beautiful printed paintings. I really can't tell the difference. So print on demand has come a long way. These are the people that we recommend for print on demand. Draft to digital, Barnes & Noble Press, Blurb, Lulu, Amazon KDP, known formerly as CreateSpace. This is Barnes & Noble Press. And again, this is independent publishing, but now you have Barnes & Noble printing your book. So that's pretty good. That carries a major imprimatur, as we say in the business. Pick your format, hardcover, softcover, print, ebook, upload your files, sell your book. Very, very simple. Barnes & Noble Press. Very, very good platform for you to publish your book. Lulu. We've done several books with Lulu. They are nice because they were one of the first to have hardcover POD books. Again, they charge a fee for layouts. They want it to look good. So you'll wind up spending anywhere between $400 and $900 on getting a beautiful layout. I think for that reason, it is preferable because they really make your book look good. And the quality is very good. And of course, then they also do your distribution, just like Barnes & Noble. They will put it into the distribution system as part of the package. So you wind up on Amazon, you wind up on Barnes & Noble and all these other platforms, and bookstores too. Bookstores can order your books. That's Lulu. Then we have Blurb. Blurb I would recommend for heavy illustrated books. So that's their niche. Blurb does heavy illustrated books, photography, beautiful picture books. If you have wonderful artwork or photographs that you want to publish, that is their unique selling proposition. And this is the latest edition, and I am absolutely amazed by this new platform. It's called Draft to Digital, Draft the number 2 digital.com. And they have an incredible set of tools. They're really version 2.0 of POD printing. I think you should definitely check them out. It does not cost a thing for either formatting or updating the book. They only take 10% of the retail price of the book. So you're making money right off the bat. You set the price of your book. Of course, you want to be reasonable. You don't want to charge your book at $89. I mean, you want to price your book somewhere between $19.95 and $24.95 is what I would recommend. And you can make as many changes as you want, and you keep the copyright. You keep the copyright. You can do whatever you want. You can choose your sales channel. I'm amazed by these folks, quite frankly. I think that this is something you ought to look at. Again, they don't do copy editing. You do your copy editing. But from that point on, they take over, and they don't charge a fee for doing all the formatting to make your book as wonderful as it can be. Amazon now has 504 million active customers worldwide, 42% of the US print book market, Apple iBooks, only 6%. And of course, there is B&N, university libraries, and so forth. Ask your external examiner to write a brief foreword. Ask your chair to write an introduction, and make sure you work on a cover. These are some of our covers, and we work with professional artists. We work with professional artists to do a beautiful cover. Again, I can put you in touch with them, but a cover is everything. A cover sells your book. So, I mean, really don't rely on your independent publishing platform to just slap something together. Work with an artist on really creating a beautiful. Okay, I'm going to go through this very quickly because we want to get to promoting your book. These are the things that you need to do to promote your book. The blurb. What is that? Well, we'll talk about that. The blurb. An EPK, an electronic press kit. Quotes and reviews, absolutely essential. Podcasts. Yes, you're going to do podcasts about your book. Author videos. Again, doesn't cost anything. Just point your iPhone or your Zoom camera at your face and start to talk for 3 minutes and upload that video. I mean, what could be easier than that? Facebook Live, we've done that. They're pretty successful. We've had some good experiences with Facebook Live. And book signings, wonderful book signings. The book I just mentioned, Driving Social Innovation, Mary Sonnet and her co-authors, Theresa Southam and Patrice Rosenthal, will have a book signing session at Winter Session, which is wonderful. We've done that many times in the past. A book signing. Book signings are great. To sell your books, you sign them, that's the nice thing about having a printed book, and do a little dedication. I've done many book signings, and it's wonderful. I was in Houston earlier this year to sign books of my biblical history books at the Episcopal Church of St. Martin's Press, and the line stretched all the way through the room and out the door. It's just really wonderful to do that. What's a blurb? Well, a blurb is everything. A blurb is a compelling summary of a book. It's about 200 to 300 words, and in it you describe what the book is about. It is described what is unique about the book, why the subject that you write about is important and timely, what type of readership you're writing for, your qualifications, and the essential takeaway for the readers. In a sense, it is a condensed book proposal, as you probably now realize, but the blurb is everything. The publishing industry works with this blurb. This blurb will go on your Amazon page. It will go on your barnesandnoble.com page. It will be used for the press releases, if you want to do a press release. The whole publicity is driven by the blurb. So write this carefully. Do multiple drafts. Again, it has to be short. It has to be short and to the point. It has to fit on one page, or less. But it has to sing. It has to sizzle. It has to really make people excited about your book. So spend some time on doing the blurb. Very important. Here is a a sample of what the authors of a book that we published, Psychology Ethics, wrote. They start with a question. Wonderful. Edited by psychologists Sherry Hatcher and Christine Jacquin. Wide range of common ethical issues, confidentiality, what is it for? What is the evidence? The evidence based on a study of 133 participants from all walks of life, thoughtful and moving narratives. What is the takeaway? The takeaway is it's a deeply valuable contribution to helping us understand the great ethical issues of our time. So here is and again, you'll be able to see this on Hillary's association website. But here is a very tight, well thought out, well edited blurb about this book. And as you can imagine, once you have this, you can really start to market the heck out of it. But it starts with a very compelling blurb. See, this is where, for colorism, the blurb winds up on the Amazon page. In an age of growing racial tensions, police brutality, and the Black Lives Matter movement, colorism is a powerful contribution that examines the roots of colorism in modern society. I wrote that blurb, and it's so important that summary really attracts people and say, oh, that's interesting. I may want to read that. It also then becomes the source for press releases. Every book that we publish has a press release issued by Fielding as part of its marketing support. And of course, it's all based on the blurb. It's all based on the blurb. So that's why you have to really spend time in honing that particular text. Book quotes. Oh my gosh, book quotes are so important. Book quotes are very simple, brief quotes endorsing the book. And you should reach out to friends, faculty that you know, relatives, maybe scholars that you're familiar with. Please send them either a PDF of your book or the blurb or a summary, whatever they want, and ask them, will you please give me a brief quote? Really, a sentence is all, a sentence or two is all we want, because those quotes have to go in the book and on the back cover. That's where you see these quotes. They have to go on the back cover. So we cannot publish a book and design the cover until the author secures these quotes from us. That's why the first thing we always say when we sign a contract with an author to be published by our university press is you're responsible for quotes. So please do that, right from the beginning. It's so important. And then book reviews. Now, book reviews are a little bit different because they have to go through the Amazon system. You cannot simply submit a review to Amazon and say, hey, put that on my page. Book reviews in Amazon, they're very strict, have to be placed by people who actually bought the book from Amazon. That's how they verify that there is no hanky-panky going on. So if you have people who buy the book from Amazon, please ask them to post a brief review, and Amazon will be able to verify that they actually bought the book from that particular platform. And that's how you get your book reviews on the Amazon page. So that's what you do. And then once you have the book, then create a PDF reviewer. Well, that's part of your EPK. Create a PDF version of your book. You can ask your publisher to do that, or you can do it yourself. Create a PDF of your book and submit that to journals. What you typically do, the journals better than anyone else, the journals who are familiar with your subject because you've done your dissertation. So you are familiar with what type of journals like to write and review books on that topic. So write to the editors of those journals and say, I've written a book on this subject, which I think is in line with what your journal is interested in. Would you be interested in reviewing the book? If so, please let me know if you would like to have a PDF version or a printed version. Some journals will accept a PDF version. Some will insist that you send a book because they want to make sure that it's a real book. You know what I mean? And so don't send them right off the bat. First, write them a letter, an email. Would you be interested in reviewing my book? And if so, would you like to receive a PDF or a printed version? Hopefully they will write back. They will either say, no, thank you, or they'll say, you know, we'd like to take a look. And then you send them whatever it is. You know, yeah, it costs a little bit of postage to send a book to that journal, but believe you me, it's worth it, because a journal review is one of the most powerful ways of promoting a book, far more important than an ad, for example, in a newspaper or a magazine. And you can write to journals, but you can also write to magazines, professional magazines, for example, coaching magazines, if you write about the coaching industry. Every profession has not only academic journals, but also professional magazines. So don't ignore those. They have usually a wide readership. So you write to those professional magazines, say, hey, would you like to review my book? It's about this. You include the blurb, obviously, the blurb once again, and say, I'd be happy to send you a PDF or a printed copy of the book. Please let me know who I should address it to so that it doesn't go into the never, never space. You know, always address it to a specific editor and ask them who that should be. And chances are you're going to get an answer back saying, you know, we would be interested. We're going to guarantee that we're going to do a review, but we would certainly be welcome to take a look at it, because that's what journals do for a living. They look at books. So these are wonderful ways that cost very little or nothing to get a review of your book, which is so incredibly important. And always ask people in your network, if they have purchased a book from Amazon, to please post a review. That's about quotes and reviews. Extremely, extremely important. Here are just 4 quotes that Christine and Sherry, 2 faculty members at Fielding's School of Psychology, got from their network. And all of these quotes went into the back cover. You know, a remarkable guide for understanding how people apply ethical norms. This book provides a fascinating mirror. Fascinating book. You know, these are things that you want. These are things that you want to see. Well-written and insightful chapters. I mean, these are endorsements that are so incredibly powerful. And in principle, it doesn't cost anything. All you have to do is reach out to people in your network and say, you know, sometimes they can be academics, but they can also be professionals, practitioners, and say, would you please write something, just 1 or 2 sentences about my book? And who would say no? Who would say no to you? If they know you and they value your work, why would they say no? I do it all the time. I just got a request from a friend of mine who is the rector of the St. Martin's Church. He had a new book about how his friendship with George H.W. Bush, the 43rd president. And he said, would you, Jean-Pierre, would you mind writing a little review? And of course I did that. You know, why would I say no? So these are very powerful and essentially cost-free strategies to create visibility for your book. The EPK. The EPK is an electronic press kit that you will typically send if somebody is interested in writing about the book. It is, again, a press release or fact sheet based on your blurb. Okay, you just format it a little bit differently. It's a fact sheet. It is a PDF reader of your book, a PDF version of your book. It includes the cover image, as you see here for Mapping America. It includes your bio, not 5 pages, please, just like 200 words, 250 words maximum, just a brief bio, which talks about, and don't say things like, I live with my cats and my favorite activity is skiing. I've seen bios coming in like that, that's not what we're necessarily interested in. What we're interested in the publishing world is what supports your ability to write about this subject as an expert. So I've done work in this community, I've done research here, I've had this position, so talk about the professional aspects of your life. Any reviews, include them. If you already have any reviews or quotes, include them. Why not? It's a further endorsement. This is the electronic press kit. And again, it doesn't cost anything to put it together. You put it in a folder, okay? You put it in a folder, then you compress your folder. I don't know how that works on Windows, but in Mac, you can select a folder and say compress, and then it compresses the size. Keep the EPK under 15 megabytes. It doesn't have to be any bigger than that. Usually it is less than 10 megabytes because you want to be able to email it. And if it gets too big, it gets rejected by some of these servers. So keep it under 15, preferably under 10 megabytes, but it's all text anyway, other than the cover image. And that's what you send. That's your calling card, EPK. It's a key element in the business. Here is a review that appeared in the Journal of Transformative Education of Valerie Benz's book, Contemplative Social for Self-Being and Life Worlds. I mean, this is worth its weight in gold, folks. To get a review like this in a journal, but published by Sage, my God, you can't pay for it. I mean, an ad doesn't go anywhere near the impact that a journal review like this, and maybe it's not always 100% positive, that's okay. The fact of the matter is they wouldn't write about your book unless they thought it had merit. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to say, I've been reviewed by the Journal of Transformative Education. You know what I mean? We encourage our authors to submit to journals all the time. It is absolutely a requirement of being published by our university press. And then here, a review, customer review on Amazon for our book on coaching. You get these 5-star reviews. Wow. Now, probably these are friends of the authors, but who cares? These are wonderful 5-star reviews on the book Innovations in Leadership Coaching, which, by the way, is profitable. We just cut a nice check for the authors, and that's wonderful when that happens, when a book is profitable. Academic presses are not known for their profitability because that's not the point. The point of an academic press is to share knowledge and to help propel the career of its faculty and its students. That's the mission of Fielding University Press. We want to provide a launch platform for the success of both our faculty, our students, and our alumni. And if in the process we actually have some books that become profitable and make money, well, that's icing on the cake. That's just wonderful. Podcasts. Podcasts are the most popular platform today to promote your chapter or book. Again, what is a podcast? A podcast is you and a microphone and a laptop. And what you could do is, for example, is create brief excerpts of, let's say, 5 or 6 of your chapters. And you create a series of 5 or 6 podcasts. And in each podcast, you talk a little bit about the key insights from that chapter. Of course, you don't give it away. You want people to buy your book, right? So you don't give away the store. But at least you talk about what it is that you discuss in each of these chapters. Now, I've done that. Typically, podcasts are 20 minutes in length. minimum 4 or 5. I think 5 or 6 episodes are really the best way to do it. You can post them for free on vimeo.com or youtube.com if you happen to use Zoom or an iPhone. I use Zoom a lot for my podcasts. Or you can do audio only, because then you have access to Apple iTunes, Spotify, Google, One. That costs a little bit of money, not a whole lot. One top audio podcast distributor is buzzsprout.com, buzzsprout.com. Very, very popular. Lots of celebrities have, and celebrity authors have podcasts on it. So this is really what you need to do in the 21st century to promote your book, is to do podcasts. It's really, really important. For example, do I have time? Here is a little clip from one of my podcasts. Welcome to this presentation about our book, The Dali Legacy. And first of all, I would like to thank the curators and staff of the Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, and particularly the two things, beautiful canvas, text of his time. You know, so often do I get a sense when I read the books of my peers that the author is so full. Now, I quickly advance to this slide because, as you can see, with a typical podcast, this is video, of course, this is not for audio, but for video, I start with a full screen introduction, just like I did this presentation. And then I simply share my PowerPoint. So I talk about the book and I use illustrations, not text, not text, please. But I use illustrations, and you can still see me on the right top corner talking about this particular book. And it's a wonderful, you just Zoom, I just use Zoom, that's all. And it's free, and I record it to my computer in this case. You can also record to the cloud, of course. And with that, I was able to edit it a little bit. I added a little bit of an introduction. And that's it. That's it. Here, I did a series of podcasts on my book, In the Footsteps of Jesus, which was a huge success. I did it during the pandemic, particularly when churches were closed. And so I seized that opportunity in the run-up to Easter of 2020 to do 6 podcasts on a book that had actually been published a few years before. It so happened that National Geographic published the 2nd edition of that book, which was very kind of them. And so I did 6 podcasts on which I recorded on Zoom, and they had hundreds, literally hundreds of, I don't know why. I put them on YouTube, I put them on Vimeo, and all of a sudden I had hundreds of people who and I saw a peak in the sales, with you can go to your Amazon page and you can go to BookScan, which will show you the sales of your book. And BookScan reported a peak in the sales as a result of these podcasts. So there is scientific proof that these podcasts do help you to sell your books. I did a whole series of several books. Here are they. And when you review this, you can go to Vimeo. They're all on Vimeo, and you can look for Women of the Bible, which is a series I did, In the Footsteps of Jesus, which again, all I did was a laptop. I used the lavalier microphone, which plugs into, lavalier microphone is one of those little microphones that clip to your shirt, which has a little bit of better audio than what you're hearing right now from me, because right now I'm using the audio of the microphone of the laptop. It's a little bit better to get a little lavalier. You can get it for $30-40 on Amazon, little lavalier that plugs into your computer. But these are very, very simple things. Author videos. Here's another thing. Talk about your book. That's it. Turn on your Zoom. Say, hey, hi. I'm Laura, and I would like to talk about my book about preventing sexual misconduct and how I came to writing this book. And you just blabber away for 2 or 3 minutes. That's it. And if you stumble, stop, record again until you basically get what you want. And you know, these are very, very simple things to do, and they don't cost anything, folks. And then you post it on YouTube. Doesn't cost anything. Or Vimeo, which is a bit of a more professional platform. I use Vimeo more than YouTube, quite frankly. I like that a little better. Here, for example, is our author videos that people did about innovations in leadership coaching. It's on our University Press website. And, you know, of course, it's also on YouTube. And let me tell you, these were major elements that drove the break-even point of this book for us. So I have some video guidelines, which I'm sure you've seen before. You can look at them, you know, make sure that you have a neutral background. Don't use one of those fake backgrounds that you can get that creates pixelated elements around your face. Make sure your face is properly lit. There's no backlight. There's no window behind you. Make sure your audio is functioning properly and so forth. And then we did webinars. We did a webinar on colorism. You can do that through Fielding. You can do it through your publisher. We had 150 people attend this webinar on colorism with the author of the book. She appeared, and she was the star, and she talked about colorism, her book, and it was a wonderful way to do it. Again, it didn't cost anything, folks. You have so many wonderful things that the great pandemic I didn't do. Here is online learning. Here's another video that I did, but I'm not going to do that right now. We're going to stop the PowerPoint for a minute, because in the time that's remaining, I want to make sure that I can answer any questions you have. We talked about promoting your book in many ways, most of which don't cost anything. And so that is how we promote and market our book. All right, I've stopped. I'm just going to stop talking. It's over to you guys. Hit me with questions.
Jean-Pierre, this is Julie. I have a question about collaborating with other authors and what might be involved with that. I was actually involved with a couple of other people. We were working on an outline, and then they kind of decided they didn't want me anymore, which was like, what? So, you know, and of course, some of that, my contributions along the way, I felt were intellectual property, you know, trying to make the whole thing better. So, I don't know if there's anything about contracting with that ahead of time, or do you just do this with your friends, or do you not bother? Any thoughts about co-authoring?
Oh, absolutely, Julie. It's a very good question. When you're going to collaborate with people on a book, and they're your friends, you typically don't want to draft a contract, because that's sort of awkward when these people are your friends. But you do want to document very, very carefully what it is that you're going to do together. And you can do that through email. But certainly, I would strongly encourage you, if you decide to collaborate on a book, to document very, very clearly in email what it is you're going to do, what the right situation is. And typically, every author, even if you're published, still retains the copyright to the underlying data of your work, the underlying research of your work. When we publish a book by an author, we retain the copyright of that physical book, of that unique book, because we've spent a lot of money creating the layouts and the production and the publishing process and the engineering. So the book as such is our copyright, but the underlying research is always the intellectual property of the author. And the same way you should approach collaborative. we do a lot of collaborative books. The book we're writing right now, which is edited by Orlando Taylor, which is a book about higher education in the 21st century. We have over 20 contributors, and they very carefully documented what each person is going to do, and by when that person is going to submit the chapter. Now, what we have in that situation, which happens a lot, is that people say they will contribute a chapter, but then don't. They're too busy. They keep missing deadlines. And so finally, we had to say to one contributor, I'm sorry, we have to move on. We can no longer wait. You're out. Because in the original description of the book that we all agreed to, we said we would submit our first draft by that date and our final draft after the peer review by that date. And if you don't make those dates, you're out. I mean, it's a game. We play a game and we all rely on each other. Now, I have not been in a situation where a collaborative was agreed upon and then one person was sort of voted off the island. Can
I say?
I think that is a very, very unique decision. I'm just fortunately never had that problem. I think what you should do in that situation is write to the authors and say, I'm disappointed by this decision. I want to make sure that whatever I was going to contribute and did submit in the process of doing so retains my intellectual copyright and that it will not be used as part of this book. And in the future, I would say, in the future, I would encourage you not to initiate any such collaborative book projects unless there is a clear understanding, confidence, and trust in the fact that all authors will contribute and that their work will be treated equitably and fairly. I think that those are the rules of the game. So I'm very disappointed, very sad to hear that, but I think you should not be disappointed by that. You should go ahead and Julie, and publish your work no matter what. Do it yourself. Absolutely.
I have had those moments, yes. So
you should do it. I know your dissertation. It's a wonderful dissertation, and I think you should write the book. Look, all the opportunities that we discussed in these 2 hours, they're all out there for free in many cases. So there is really no reason why you should not be able to publish it.
Well, thank you. But that does raise the second question that I had, which is, you mentioned, that your podcast about the life of Jesus, whatever, that, it had been a few years ago. So then what would you consider to be, I guess, a dissertation that's too old? And even if you marry it with what the current media kinds of things might be, I mean, is there, do your dissertations age out?
Well, I mean, if we have a dissertation that was written 20, 25 years ago, and there was an issue that we have to bring it up to speed. The fact of the matter is, though, that the human condition doesn't change. Leadership issues don't change. They are the same. And I think if you could bring your dissertation up to speed, as you just mentioned yourself, with some up-to-date references from The Economist, from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, perhaps from 1 or 2 journals that you still have access to, I think absolutely. We've done dissertations that were, particularly as it relates to sustainability, for example, we've done 2 monographs with multiple dissertation contributions by alumni and students, and some of which were quite old. And we said, bring them up to speed with the most recent references, and then why not? I mean, the ideas behind your dissertation remain valid, regardless of what literature references you've done. The challenges that people express to you in your interviews remain valid. They don't change. I mean, we had a situation with a book we published last year called The Handbook of Online Learning, which was an update of the Handbook of Online Learning published 10 years ago. And yes, what we wound up doing is chuck the Handbook of Online Learning of 10 years ago, literally 95%, and rewrite the whole thing from scratch because the technology has so much changed in terms of high bandwidth and Vimeo and Zoom rather, and of course the pandemic and all that stuff. So that book had to be chucked and revisited strictly because of the technology. But in terms of the man-machine interface and the interaction in an asynchronous online platform, all that research remained in place because that hasn't changed. Asynchronous communication that is not live through various tests and particularly in undergraduate education, they use a lot of online programs that are basically all multiple choice. That has to remain valid. So I would encourage you not to be discouraged by that.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry. Somebody else go.
Carlene first, and then Kathy.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Isbouts, for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. It's been a pleasure to be on some of these calls. I have what I think is a simple question, but it's just bothering me. I've been a slave to the indents and bullets. It didn't bother me during my dissertation, but now I am looking for a way how I can ensure that it's all removed before if ever I have something to submit. How do I make sure of that all indents, automatic indents and bullets and numbers and stuff like that are removed? I consider it as noise, but I want to make sure that it's not there. It's not an issue.
Right, yeah, indents, if you used indents with the tab key, that is a bit of an issue because you would theoretically have to go and select the entire manuscript and then set your indent tab on the top of the ruler in your Word interface and then delete the tab key. I wouldn't be that concerned about the tab key, quite frankly, Carlene, because a tab key can be easily fixed in the layout process. Bullet point, what you do is you select your bullet points, you go up to Word and you say none. You can do that. You go, depending on what you have, Windows or Mac, you go up to where the formatting drop-down menu and you simply say none. And then what will happen is the Word created bullets disappear, everything shifts to the left, and then you manually type a bullet and you hit the space bar, and this way you manually create the bullet points that you want to do. Auto-formatted bulleted items are a big issue for the layout artists. These are not engineers. What they see is when they import your Word document into their environment, which is Adobe InDesign, which is the professional format for book layouts. They see lots of scribbles as part of the metadata that was imported. So I would say, let's not worry about your tab key right now, but if you can fix your bulleted items by selecting them, going up to the drop-down menu, saying none, and then recreate those bulleted items manually, you're good. You're good to go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Kathy.
First, thank you. Thank you, Jean-Pierre. This is fabulous, but I feel like I'm overwhelmed by all of the information. Could you just speak to the differences between or among development editors, copyright editors, and at what point do we begin to bring them into our development of our manuscript?
Kathy, it's a very good question. If you are fairly confident about your writing, if you think, and again, writing is editing, folks. I never submit a manuscript to my publisher unless I've done at least 5 passes. I mean it. So you read it, you write your manuscript, set it aside for a week, come back to it with fresh eyes, read it again, edit it. So a lot of editing, Kathy, you can do yourself simply by creating some distance from the work you've done, coming back to it, reading with fresh eyes and saying, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't work, it makes sense. Very simple things like Word, spell check. These are tools in Word. I'm not a big fan of Microsoft, but Word does have some very good spell check and grammar check tools. Turn those on. Grammarly.com is another wonderful format. Grammarly.com is you submit your manuscript and it will highlight areas that it considers questionable, and you can do that. So a lot can be done in preparation. The key difference between an editor and a copy editor is that an editor is a writing coach, and we have those. So I have received manuscripts that are very important, but where the writing was, it was a little iffy. And I have a wonderful editor. She's called Elena Scarano, and she is a wordsmith. So she will make things, she will polish things, just like Michelangelo polishes, the David in the final iteration. She is a polisher, and she will do a very good job. A copy editor, on the other hand, does not address the writing style, simply the proofing of your manuscript, both content-wise and grammatically. So we have Lars, we have Mary, we have wonderful copy editors who will just, very carefully go through sentence by sentence and flag anything and correct anything grammatically that they think ought to be. And these are people with masters in English. So these are people who are very, very good. In fact, Elena is a published author herself. Lars is a very accomplished screenwriter. So these are people who are not doing this as a hobby. These are professionals. So this is a different thing. Editors, you want to help with your writing. Copy editors, you want with essentially the grammar and structure. But copy editors will sometimes flag areas as well. Many times, copy editors on the manuscript that I give them come back and say, I have put some flags in the text for the writer to take a look at because I couldn't quite figure out what she or he was talking about. That happens a lot. And then you as the, even though they're not editor, they're copy editors, they will still sometimes say, this needs to be looked at one more time. So that's essentially the difference between the two.
Those are the two. The other term, and I don't mean to take up too much time, is development editors who read your manuscript or read what you're writing and say, well, you know what, if I were a reader of this or a user, an audience that you're directing this to, shouldn't it be phrased slightly differently, or shouldn't you create more of a hook? Because
Right.
We're writing academically and we're converting, as you've said, the dissertation that's academic writing to something that's more reader friendly. And it's that conversion that at times you need a fresh set of eyes or thought.
Yeah, development editors typically come in earlier in the process.
Okay.
When you have a very first draft, or when you simply, just beginning, when the draft is still very fresh and fairly raw, as I would term it, that's when you bring in the development editor, because you don't want to necessarily start polishing a finished sculpture. You still want to make sure what the sculpture should look like. So that's different from an editor. And we don't work with development editors typically, even though I think Elena could do it, because we typically work with students or alumni who have done a dissertation. So they've been through a whole process of writing with their dissertation committee. But I can imagine that if you were writing the book from scratch, that you would do a very first rough draft and then put it to a development editor saying, is this what the sculpture should look like? Or do I have to place the arms and the legs differently? That is far more primary in its approach than an editor or a copy editor who basically take a finished work and now try to improve on it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess, and you think Elena would be able to do?
Elena is just so wonderful. She has, and she has worked on some of our students' dissertations as well. And students come back to me and saying she was an angel. She did so much in helping me to see what needed to be improved and what was good, what needed to be retained.
So offline, you can get us her name.
Yeah, just if any of you were interested, just write me a little email and I'll put you in touch with her.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
This is Julie again, Jean-Pierre. One thing that I found with the copy editor that I used for the chapter is that the moral moorings is someone who was also an editor for one of the journals in my profession. So what I found is that there was kind of like a little added bonus in that she did know, something of the material, and so gave probably a little more content feedback. So I don't know if that someone that one could look for, You
could definitely do that. Those editors are more expensive. I mean, when you talk about an editor, and there are those editors, some of the editors that we work with, we find on 5R, 5R.com, FIVER.com. That is a marketplace of professionals across a whole scale of human activity. Video editors, artists, we found some artists on that platform. When you do work with them, everything gets contracted through that platform, of course. It's not just a showcase, it's an actual exchange of human talent. But if you have a need for an editor, let's say, in specifically a certain academic discipline, that's where you would go. If you want to have an editor who understands clinical psychology, for example, that's where you would go, 5R.com. Okay, we're coming to the end of the workshop, but you guys have been wonderful. Maybe we have time for one more comment or question. If not, now is a good time to go back to your recording of the World Cup of this morning, which you had to miss. There are some important games to be played in this World Cup. I'm a World Cup addict. I'm a World Cup addict. I mean, I'm absolutely a soccer fanatic, or football as it should rightfully be called, but that's a different story. In any case, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you for staying with me throughout these 2 hours. I want to hand it back to Hillary for closing comments and also about where you can find the recording and the actual slides that I will share with Hillary, and Hillary will then distribute it back to you. Hillary, your final words.
Thank you so much. Jean-Pierre, this is a delight. I learn from you every time, and you make me want to write something, and I don't have anything to write, but maybe someday. And I know this is the resource to come to, but thank you everybody for showing up today. We really appreciate you staying. And in terms of the recording and the slides, everybody who registered for this, I will be emailing this information to you as soon as I get it prepared, which will probably be no later than Monday. And in terms of the rest of the slides and the videos, I'm putting everything in one email for you. So look forward to that. And also I put in the chat, we have an online community on the Fielding alumni website. This is the one that I was talking about. We'll be updating in 2023. I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat for you. This is the online community space, and you can join for free. Let's see, go ahead and stick this in here. And then last but not least, I'm just going to do one more pitch for 6 Perfect Days in Vienna with Jean-Pierre. There are some spaces left. This is in 2023. It is September 16th through the 23rd. And I'll go ahead and drop that information in the chat. Spaces are filling up pretty quick. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, but Elena Nicholson, I'll connect you with her, who is the tour guide extraordinaire. Other than that, thank you so much, Jean-Pierre. And I know that Dr. Pauline Alpert had to leave, who is our main sponsor, but good to see you all. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.